"Stay away from me, you crazy old woman." Those were Karen Thompson's exact words, right before she shoved my blind mother onto decorative iron spikes. I watched the security footage in horror as the HOA president's hands thrust forward, sending Mom crashing backward onto the wrought iron fence. What Karen didn't know, she'd just assaulted the mother of the most feared disability rights attorney in America. The legal apocalypse I was about to unleash would make Supreme Court history. Mom had been independent despite losing her sight a decade ago. She navigated her garden confidently using textured markers she'd installed, small ceramic tiles, brass knobs and wooden blocks that helped map her surroundings. Her white cane tapped gently on the path as she tended the garden she'd loved for over 40 years. Our peaceful neighborhood had recently transformed when the Crystal Springs HOA took over, promising to preserve property values while hiding their web of restrictions. I'd warned Mom about potential issues with her adaptive equipment, but living 2 hours away, I couldn't fight every battle. Few in Crystal Springs knew what I actually did for a living. They knew I was some kind of lawyer, but not that I'd argued. 17 Supreme Court cases shaped disability law nationwide and built my reputation dismantling discriminatory policies piece by piece. The problem started small at first. A formal letter about Mom's wind chimes. Unapproved decorative elements that exceed acceptable noise levels. I should have recognized this as the opening move in their calculated attack. Next came citations about her raised garden beds, non-conforming structures visible from the street. Each complaint more ridiculous than the last. Mom called me concerned, but determined to handle things herself. She attended the next HOA meeting armed with documentation about the Americans with Disabilities Act, trying to explain that her modifications were necessary accommodations, not decorative choices. The meeting minutes recorded Karen Thompson's dismissive response. "Rules apply to everyone equally. We can't make exceptions just because you find them inconvenient." As if blindness were merely an inconvenience like a sprained ankle. I started driving down more frequently, documenting each interaction, taking photographs of similar violations that went unsighted in other yards. It was becoming clear that Mom was being targeted, but why? Then came the certified letter demanding removal of all tactile markers from the property within 14 days. The very guides that allowed Mom to navigate safely were suddenly deemed unapproved ground fixtures that disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. The irony of citing visual harmony to a blind woman wasn't lost on either of us. Mom filed for a formal accommodation request, providing medical documentation and detailed explanations of each adaptive element's purpose. Karen's response was, "Chilling. The HOA board has reviewed your request and found insufficient grounds for exemption. Removal must be completed by the specified date or fines will accrue at $100 per day." I advised Mom to leave everything in place while I prepared legal documents, but neither of us anticipated the HOA's next move would cross the line from harassment to physical violence. The threats escalated. A notice appeared on Mom's door, warning that HOA representatives would inspect for compliance and were authorized to remove violations. I called Karen immediately. "This is harassment and discrimination under federal law," I told her, carefully controlling my tone. "My mother has submitted all required documentation for accommodation." "Mr. Lin," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your mother agreed to our covenants when she chose not to opt out of the HOA formation. The board's decision is final." "You're making a mistake," I warned. "This could have serious legal consequences." "Is that a threat?" Karen laughed. "From some kind of lawyer? Unless you specialize in HOA law, I suggest you stay in your lane." If only she knew exactly what lane I occupied in the legal world. But I decided to give her one last chance. "I'm formally notifying you that any attempt to remove my mother's accessibility accommodations violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and multiple state accessibility laws. We've consulted our own attorneys, Karen shot back. Perhaps you should do the same. That evening, I installed security cameras around Mum's property, a precaution that would soon prove crucial. I also began compiling a dossier on Karen Thompson and the entire HOA board, discovering a pattern of discriminatory enforcement against elderly residents and the few minority families in the neighborhood. Mr. Kaczynski from next door confirmed my suspicions. "They've been after your mom since day one," he confided. Karen called her an eyesore to the community at the last private board meeting, said her special treatment would bring down property values. The next week brought escalating tensions. Mom found HOA violation stickers on her textured garden markers. Her request to address the board again was denied without explanation. Then came notices of accumulated fines, $1,050 for continued non-compliance with threats of property liens if left unpaid. I prepared a formal legal notice deliberately on plain letterhead that didn't reveal my specialization. The HOA responded with a cease and desist letter of their own, threatening to sue for harassment of board members if we continued to obstruct community standards enforcement. What happened next showed just how far Karen was willing to go. Security footage captured 3 board members measuring Mom's raised garden beds at night, placing violation notices and, most disturbingly, removing several of her ceramic navigation markers, leaving dangerous gaps in her mental map of the property. The following morning, Mom fell in her own garden, unable to locate the pathway without her markers. Nothing serious, just bruised knees and palms, but the psychological damage was severe. For the first time, she felt vulnerable in her own home. "Maybe I should just move," she whispered when I arrived to check on her. "Find somewhere more accepting." Those words lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about garden decorations or property values anymore. This was about my mother's right to exist independently in the home she'd loved for decades. This was about dignity. "You're not going anywhere, Mom," I promised, finally pulling out my Supreme Court business cards from my wallet. It's time Karen Thompson learns exactly who she's been messing with. The day everything changed started like any other. Mom was in her garden when a white SUV pulled up in her driveway, Karen Thompson stepping out in her crisp pantsuit, clipboard in hand. She wasn't alone. 2 other board members flanked her as she marched up to Mom, who was watering her roses with practiced precision. "Mrs. Lynn, you've been given ample time to comply with HOA regulations," Karen announced, her voice carrying that false sweetness that barely masked her condescension. "We're here to address the continued violations." Mom turned, startled by their unannounced presence. "I've submitted accommodation requests under the ADA," she replied calmly, her hands tightening around her cane. "My son is helping me appeal your decision." "The accommodation was denied," Karen snapped, gesturing to the men who began moving toward the garden. "We're authorized to remove non-compliant fixtures." The sound of one of Mom's ceramic markers being wrenched from the ground made her flinch. "Stop," she called out. "Those are my navigation aids. I can't safely move around without them." Karen's laugh was cold. "I'm sure you'll manage," she said. "Just stay inside if you can't follow community standards." Mom lunged forward, her cane sweeping the ground frantically as she tried to protect her markers. "You can't do this. This is illegal discrimination," she cried out, bumping into Karen, who stood directly in her path. What happened next was captured perfectly on the security cameras I'd installed. Karen grabbed Mom's shoulders and violently shoved her backward, her face twisted with disgust. "Stay away from me, you crazy old woman," she spat. Mom lost her balance, her arms pinwheeling as she tried to find something to grab onto. I watched the footage later in slow motion, seeing the exact moment Mom's body hit the decorative iron fence that bordered her rose garden. the ornamental spikes piercing through her clothes into her side and thigh, her scream echoing across the previously quiet street. Blood spread across Mom's gardening shirt, her face pale with shock and pain. Karen backed away, already crafting her defense. "That's not what happened. She's confused. She attacked me first." The paramedics arrived within minutes, carefully, lifting Mom from the spikes and rushing her to county hospital. The doctor's words still haunt me. The spikes caused significant damage but missed her vital organs. She's going to need extensive rehabilitation. The first violation notice arrived while Mom was still in post-op, addressed to her hospital room with the cold efficiency of a predator, sensing vulnerability. Fence modification without approval, $250 fine, as if the blood staining the wrought iron was a decoration she'd chosen. I set it aside, focusing instead on Mom's recovery, the doctor's updates, the physical therapy schedule, and the growing stack of medical bills. The second notice came the following day, more threatening than the first. Unauthorized absence from property causing landscaping neglect, $500 fine, with additional warnings about potential liens if the violation wasn't promptly addressed. I documented everything, creating a meticulous file while saying little. My silence apparently emboldened them. The third day brought Karen herself, striding into Mom's hospital room like she owned the place, her designer purse clutched in white-knuckled hands. "I've brought a settlement offer," she announced without preamble or expression of concern for Mom's condition. "The HOA is willing to waive accumulated fines in exchange for a signed non-disclosure agreement." She placed a document on the hospital tray. "The association admits no wrongdoing in what was clearly an unfortunate accident." Mom's medication had her drifting in and out of consciousness, unaware of this vulture at her bedside. "I'll need to review any proposed agreements," I said quietly, not yet revealing my specialty. My voice must have carried something dangerous because Karen's eyes narrowed with sudden uncertainty. "The terms are generous, considering your mother was trespassing on community property when she fell." It took everything in me not to react to this blatant lie. The community property was Mom's own garden, and we both knew it. "I'll be in touch," I said, my calm tone masking the strategic planning already happening in my mind. Karen left, clearly believing she'd intimidated us into compliance. She had no idea what was coming. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday in the beige-walled community center. I arrived early, dressed not in my usual Supreme Court attire, but in a simple blue suit that wouldn't stand out. Mom was still hospitalized, but stable enough that I could focus on what needed to be done. Karen's eyebrows raised slightly when I walked in, clearly surprised I would show up after what she probably thought was a successful intimidation campaign. Members of the community filled the plastic chairs, some avoiding my gaze, others offering sympathetic glances. The room fell silent as Karen called the meeting to order. "We have a full agenda tonight," she began, "but I'd like to address the unfortunate incident with Mrs. Lynn first, before rumors spread. The truth is, she became combative when approached about clear violations and accidentally injured herself when board members were forced to defend themselves." Murmurs rippled through the room as neighbors who'd witnessed the event exchanged glances. I stood up. "Excuse me, I'd like to address the board regarding this matter." I placed my briefcase on the table at the front of the room, my movements deliberate, unhurried. Karen's smile was tight. "Of course, Mr. Lynn, you have 3 minutes per our bylaws." I nodded, thanking her with practiced courtesy developed through years of court appearances. "I understand you believe this is a simple matter of rule enforcement," I began, my voice measured as I placed my mother's medical records on the table. "Before addressing this specific incident, I should introduce myself properly. While many of you know me as Lily Lynn's son, what you may not know is that I'm Michael Chen, lead counsel at Chen Disability Law, and the attorney who successfully argued Dominic v. Hamilton County before the Supreme Court, establishing criminal liability for HOA violations in housing cases. The color drained from Karen's face as I continued to place documents on the table. I've represented disability rights clients in 17 Supreme Court cases with a 94% success rate. I was also lead counsel on Roberts v. Parkview Estates, which established that HOAs cannot override ADA accommodations regardless of when the HOA was formed. I pulled out a flash drive containing the security footage. The room was absolutely silent now. Do you recognize this case, Karen? Your board cited it in your rejection of my mother's accommodation request, claiming it didn't apply. The problem is I wrote that brief, and you fundamentally misrepresented the court's ruling. I turned to address the wider board. I have here complete footage from my mother's security system showing Ms. Thompson physically assaulting a blind woman on her own property after attempting to remove legally protected disability accommodations. I've already forwarded this evidence to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the State Attorney General's Office, all of whom have opened investigations into this HOA. Someone in the back of the room gasped as I continued methodically. This isn't just about my mother anymore. I've identified 7 other residents with disabilities who have been denied reasonable accommodations by this board, creating a pattern of discrimination that violates federal law. The legal term for this is deliberate indifference, and it carries both civil and criminal penalties. Karen attempted to interrupt. This is absurd. We're simply enforcing community standards that everyone agreed to. I shook my head. I've prepared a comprehensive brief detailing how this HOA has systematically violated the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and multiple state accessibility laws. I placed the thick document on the table. It includes documented evidence of selective enforcement, targeted harassment, and now physical assault. The community center doors opened and 2 uniformed police officers entered, accompanied by a woman in a business suit who I recognized as the regional director for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're here regarding the assault on Lily Lynn, one officer announced. Karen Thompson, I presume? Karen's face had moved from pale to mottled red. This is outrageous. You can't just come in here and threaten us. We have rights too. My smile was professional, perfected through decades of courtroom battles. Yes, you do, including the right to qualified legal counsel, which I strongly suggest you seek immediately, as you're facing both civil and criminal charges for your actions. Within days, the local news was covering what they called the HOA spike assault. Federal housing authorities issued emergency cease and desist orders, freezing all HOA actions pending investigation. Criminal charges were filed against Karen for assault and 3 other board members for conspiracy to violate civil rights. I filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit detailing every violation, every ignored accommodation request, and every instance of targeted harassment. The settlement, when it came, was substantial enough to ensure Mom would never have financial concerns again. A portion was set aside to establish a legal aid fund for disabled homeowners facing HOA discrimination. The court appointed a receiver to manage the former HOA's affairs with strict oversight from disability rights organizations. Mom's property was permanently exempted from all HOA regulations under federal disability accommodation laws. 6 months later, I sat with Mom on her newly designed patio, listening to the gentle melody of wind chimes that no one would ever dare complain about again. She ran her fingers over the smooth ceramic markers that lined her garden path, a path now wider and safer than before. Sometimes, she said, the most beautiful gardens grow from the hardest seasons. I nodded, surprised by the wisdom in her words and the strength she'd shown throughout this ordeal. Her garden now flourished more beautiful than ever, a testament to resilience and a reminder that justice sometimes grows in unexpected places.